Okay, well, thank you and welcome to my session, Powering Up Dataverse and Power BI with Azure Functions. My name is Rosie Jurovic. I'm Business Intelligence Developer at Maxica Consulting. A bit about what I do at work. I spend a lot of time developing in Power Platform, particularly Canvas apps and Dataverse and Power Automate as well. And I like to use Python to supercharge solutions, you can say. A little bit about my personal interests. I like spending time socializing with family and friends, and then doing everything outdoors. So I like running, cycling, open water swimming, everything in the nature. I have my social media links on here. So the best place probably to reach me is on LinkedIn. You can get me on Twitter as well. And I've put the link for our company website directly to the tool that I develop for Maxica 365. So check it out. If you have any questions after this session, then you can reach me on LinkedIn, send me a message. Always looking to connect with people and grow my network. So let's jump into this session. So I want to start the session by doing a small poll. So a bit of background, my reason for doing the session today is to showcase my experience of getting started with Azure Functions. So I'm coming from the perspective of a complete beginner. So at the beginning or at the end of last year, I'd never used Azure Functions. So before we go into how you can start using them as well, I want to ask if you have used them before. So if you have, then please let me know what have you used them for. So you can maybe put 2 or 3 words, say something like yes, and process automation, for example. Also, if you haven't used them, then please join in the poll as well, so we can get a feel for what the audience's knowledge is already. You can join the poll here at menti.com and use the code 16179540. Please give me a shout if nobody can access that or if you have any problems. Otherwise, please join in the poll. Okay, so we can see some responses are coming through. So I think there's several people that are saying no, so that's good. So hopefully this session will be particularly useful for you. I can see somebody's using it for machine learning. I'm super interested to find out more about that and data consumption as well. So what have I used them for? Well, my original use case for getting started with Azure Functions was to build and run what was, for me, a fairly complex data transformation. And I needed to use Python to do this. I needed it to run every hour during working day so that my Power BI report was going to always show latest data. Now, I hadn't used Azure Functions before, and I started to explore, okay, how can I run this? I couldn't afford anything like a virtual machine. I didn't need anything like that. So I was looking for something really on a smaller scale. This serverless computing option appealed to me because I don't have a resource in my team to manage infrastructure or anything like that. And I was really just looking to run one fairly small piece of code. I decided that Azure Functions would be ideal using Timer Trigger because that fits the best with my use case at the time. So I was using Function Apps, Dataverse, and Power BI as well. This diagram shows the architecture of that solution. As you can see, there are various Azure resources that you also need to configure. Today's demo, I'm just going to purely focus on the functional aspects of the function, if you can say that. So we're just going to be looking at this simplified version. There are a few prerequisites that you need to be aware of when getting started with Azure Functions. So you're going to need Azure subscription, Power BI license, regular Power BI Pro license is fine. If you're using Dataverse like me, then of course you need Power Apps license to for your Dataverse capacity, and you will need to configure application registration. So you'll need to add an environment service principal for Dataverse. You can add them as application user in Power Platform Admin Center. At the end of the session, I'm going to share a link to a blog. Matthew Devaney's done this brilliant article on exactly how you can do that, so I'll share it. It's super useful. And then you need to do exactly the same thing for Power BI as well. So you need to create environment service principal and just add them as a member to the Power BI workspace where your report is sitting. So with all of that being said, I think we can jump over to the demo. So first things first, we are going to create our function locally. Just give me a shout. Can you now see Visual Studio Code?
Yep.
Yeah, you can? Yeah. Perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to create our function locally. So I've got the Azure extension installed here, and you can see that I'm already signed in. And in the workspace here at the bottom, you can see that there's this little Thunderbolt with a plus icon. So we're going to go ahead and create the function. We just need to choose a repository for it. So we've selected that folder. I'm using Python, but you can use all of these languages that you can see here as well. So pick the language that you're most comfortable with and select your interpreter. So personally, I always use Anaconda. And then we're going to select our trigger. Now, for my use case, my experience, I've used Timer Trigger. As you can see, there are all of these other triggers available. I'm going to share the link from Microsoft Learn about Azure Functions at the end, and it goes into detail about all the triggers. I'm certain that there's one for your use case, but for today's demo, let's have a look at Timer Triggers. So we can set the name, and that default is fine. Now we're being prompted to configure the cron expression. Maybe you've never used cron expressions before, but we're going to use these to schedule our Azure function. I'm just going to quickly share this slide with you. I've just lifted this out of Microsoft Learn. It's a great table because all of these examples, really you can just configure all of these to suit your own use case. So from these, very likely you can set exactly what you need from this. So I'm going to share the link for this at the end. So in case you've never used cron expressions, this is going to be useful for you. Okay, so coming back into VS Code. So what do we want? We want ours to run every hour during the working day. So it's just going to be 9 till 5 p.m. And I think we need 3 stars like that. That's it. And we're going to open it here. So you can see that it goes ahead and creates the virtual environment. And as that loads, you're going to see that all of the required file structure is created for you. So we can see that the timer trigger has already been set up for us here. And we just need to now add our code into this. I'm just going to switch over to one that I made earlier. So here we can see it's exactly the same file structure. I've just simply got my Python script and added it in here. Now, just a note on the code. As I mentioned, my original use case for getting started with functions was that I needed to run fairly complex algorithm. I couldn't achieve the same output using Dataverse or even Power BI. So I was using Python for it. But today's demo, I'm just going to do a really simple data transformation. That's so we can easily walk through this smaller piece of code. So the timer trigger is already created for us by Azure. And then the first step is we're going to authenticate into Dataverse. So we put in our tenant ID and then our service principal, app ID and password up here and authenticate into Dataverse. So the first step is we're going to do a GET request using Dataverse API. I'm going to just quickly show you the table where we're getting data from. So we've got this TriLife sales table, which is a table of products for our made-up company, which is TriLife, which is a triathlon sales company. As you can see, there's order number, various products that you can buy, product ID, salesperson, unit price, etc. There's this rolling total column. So for today's demo, this is the column that I want to populate in Python, okay? So coming back into our code, there's this one. We've got our GET request. So it really is super simple. We just pop in our Dataverse environment URL. We're calling the API. We put in our table name in here, and then simply just select the columns that we want to pull data from. That data is then delivered to us in JSON output. So for Python, we're just going to convert that into a data frame. So that's all that's happening here. And then this small section is simply my data transformation. So this super simple, but for this use case, I'm simply grouping the data frame by salesperson and calculating the roll-in sum of units by salesperson. But for your own use case, in this section here, you can apply any code you like. So maybe you want to integrate with another API, maybe you want to do process automation, maybe like me, you want to do more complex data transformation, then you can just apply this in this section right here. Once that's ready, we need to convert that data frame back to JSON format for posting back to Dataverse. And for our post request, I'm simply iterating through the list of dictionaries and posting each row back. Now, the post request string configuration is exactly the same. The only different thing to bear in mind is that I like to call them metadata columns. I don't know if that's the right terminology, but these ones that are like created by, created on behalf by, created on, import sequence number, blah, blah, blah. All the ones that are auto-created by Dataverse, you do need to declare them here in this string. So that's the only difference with the post request. So we do our post back to Dataverse, and then once that's done, we are then ready to trigger Power BI REST API, because remember, for my original use case, I wanted my Power BI report to always show the very latest data. So as soon as that data has been sent back to Dataverse following the transformation, it's good, it's ready to go. Let's refresh Power BI report. Exactly the same thing for authentication. We're just using our environment service principal that we've got as member in the workspace. We find our workspace ID and dataset ID and pop them in here. And then again, a very simple piece of code. We just authenticate. We then look to see if the current or latest Power BI refresh has completed. And if it has, then we trigger the API call. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour of the code. Once you're happy with your code locally in Visual Studio, you're going to go ahead and debug it, right? So we want to test this locally now. So let's start debugging that. And then what we should see is our fingers crossed, if the demo works successfully, we should see our output is sent to Dataverse and our Power BI report is refreshed as well. So let's just sort this to show our, oh, wrong column. Let's just sort this one. Perfect, 750. So we can see that our new data has been sent back to Dataverse and our rolling total column has been populated. And then we should see our Power BI report. We should see our Power BI report has refreshed as well. So if we take a look, we're now able to compare our salespeople for our TriLife company to see who is our top performer and who is our performers, our salespeople that maybe need some additional support as well. So we've tested our function locally and we're happy that it's working. So now it's time to deploy. So we're going to open up our Azure extension, find our function in the bottom here. And I don't know if you can see, it's super tiny. There's this cloud with a little up arrow, and we just click it to say deploy to function app. Now, as you can see, I already have the function app created. If you don't have it created here, you're just going to be prompted now to create your function app, configure your storage account and region, and then that's all just going to deploy for you. However, it does take a little while. So I just want to take the opportunity to now show you where the function sits in Azure Portal. So I'm going to come over to one that I've done already. So just to confirm, you just click this little cloud and the up arrow and go ahead and deploy. Coming over to the one I've already done. Here we can see our function app within the portal. And the main area I want to make you aware of is this section down here. So if you come into functions, this is where you're able to monitor your function runs. Now, I use this all the time. I find it super useful. What you can also build into here is logging. So you can get detailed information on any errors with your code, why it hasn't run properly, any responses from your APIs, and then you can just access them all in here. So I think, let me just double check. I think that's end of the demo. So I'm just going to quickly jump back over to the PowerPoint. And we talked through cron already. Yeah, so final stage, I just want to share with you a few resources that I used on my own journey getting started. So as I mentioned at the beginning, Matthew Devaney, he has a great article on using application users in Power Platform environment. Matthew Devaney, if you work at all in Power Platform, his blog is amazing. I can't recommend it enough. Even if you don't work in Power Platform already and you're just interested to see the art of the possible, then definitely go ahead and check out his blog. I'm also sharing here Microsoft Learn pages that include the cron expressions as well. And then a blog that I referenced when I was getting started, this Towards Data Science blog. They're using Python for slightly different example than my own with Azure Functions, but still useful resource, and I recommend that you check it out. That concludes my session. I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are any.